The skies over Earth were filled with the roar of explosions and the shimmering streaks of laser fire. Humanity's fleet, once a symbol of technological prowess, now lay shattered, with ships crippled and drifting in the vacuum of space. The Zorath had come with overwhelming force, a tidal wave of destruction that swept across Earth's defenses with cold, clinical precision. They did not just conquer, they annihilated. The alien ships, vast and monolithic, towered over the human fleet like predators stalking their prey. Admiral Rachel Burke, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet, was one of the last to remain at her post. Her hands gripped the command console with white-knuckled intensity as her fleet's defensive lines crumbled under the Zorath assault. On the view screen, Earth's homeworld was a burning orb, once a vibrant blue, now marred with the scars of war. Her ships, heroes of the past, were being consumed by the Zorath onslaught. "We've lost communication with the outer colonies, Admiral. The Zorath are everywhere," reported her comms officer, his voice cracking with the gravity of their situation. Burke's heart sank as she stared at the decimated remains of the outer fleet, their once proud ships now reduced to wreckage. Earth was losing, and fast. There was no escape, no way out. Yet, despite the odds, her voice remained steady. "We fight until the last." Her decision was final. But even she knew the truth. They couldn't win this battle. The Zorath were too powerful. Earth's defenses had been built for containment, not for the full-scale war they were now thrust into. And yet, as the chaos of the battle raged around her, Burke's mind raced, seeking a way to turn the tide. As the final wave of attacks approached, the command ship Vigilance took a direct hit. The bridge was plunged into darkness, then filled with the shrieking alarm of impending doom. Burke's chest tightened as the lights flickered back on, revealing the grave expressions of her crew. They had moments, maybe seconds, before the Zorath descended like a hammer. "Admiral, we can't hold out any longer," her tactical officer said, voice low with the cold truth. Burke's eyes locked onto the view of Earth, now almost completely consumed by the Zorath's attack. But in her mind, she could still hear the voices of the billions of people who had trusted them to protect their world. In a final, defiant act, Burke ordered her crew to broadcast a last message, a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit. "The warships of Earth will never surrender the stars." The transmission echoed across the stars, reaching every corner of the galaxy, a message of defiance and hope. The Zorath might have destroyed Earth's defenses, but they could never extinguish the fire of humanity's will. It was a declaration, and the galaxy would hear it. The ruins of Earth were a grim reminder of the Zorath's brutality. Once proud cities now lay in smoldering heaps, and vast stretches of wilderness were scorched beyond recognition. Yet, in the ashes, something remarkable was stirring. Humanity's survival instincts had kicked in. Against all odds, the human spirit refused to break. Commander Ilara Vaughn stood at the helm of a makeshift command center, an underground bunker carved into the remains of a military base. It was dark, cramped, and far removed from the once glorious control rooms of the old Earth fleet, but it was still a place of hope. Across the room, a series of battered screens flickered with intermittent communications from the scattered remnants of Earth's fleet. The broadcast message sent by Admiral Burke, "The warships of Earth will never surrender the stars," had sparked something new. A fire had been ignited, and it was spreading. Vaughn's hands moved swiftly over the tactical display, coordinating with small pockets of resistance scattered across the planet. The Zorath, though seemingly unstoppable, had underestimated humanity's adaptability. Earth's fighters were small and often outgunned, but they could hit fast and hard. Guerrilla tactics, strikes against Zorath supply lines, sabotage missions, and hit-and-run space skirmishes had become humanity's primary mode of warfare. No longer fighting for conquest, they fought for survival, for their homes, and for their place in the stars. "Commander Vaughn," a voice called out from the corner of the room, drawing her attention to Lieutenant Marcus Hale. His face was grim as he gestured toward the monitor. "We've received word from the Europa colony. They've got critical intel on a Zorath fuel depot near Saturn's rings. If we can hit it hard enough, we could cripple their ability to keep up with this invasion." Vaughn considered the information for a moment. Every part of her wanted to dive into this mission. It was a chance, a window of opportunity, however small. But the risks were immense. The Zorath had been brutal in their counterattacks, and Earth's remaining fleet was stretched thin. They had no room for error. But then her mind went to Earth's civilians, the countless lives that had already been lost. Their families, their friends, their homes. Everything they'd once known was gone. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed unbearable. "Prepare the fleet for launch," she said, her voice unwavering. "We go for the depot." The crew jumped into action, coordinating with every available ship and pilot. The mission would be a gamble. They would have no backup if something went wrong. The small fleet of human ships would need to hit hard and fast, then get out before the Zorath could retaliate. As the fleet assembled near the outskirts of the solar system, Vaughn stood at the observation window, her thoughts momentarily drifting to Admiral Burke's last words. "We will never surrender." In the cold expanse of space, Earth's ships were few, but they were not weak. The resolve of humanity was their greatest weapon. And as the fleet jumped into hyperspace towards Saturn, Vaughn knew they were about to show the galaxy that they had only begun to fight. The strike on the Zorath fuel depot had been a success beyond their wildest expectations. The mission had crippled the Zorath's supply lines around Saturn, causing a chain reaction of explosions that crippled their war machine in that part of the solar system. Humanity had achieved a rare victory, and for the first time since the Zorath's invasion, there was a glimmer of hope. But the cost had been steep. Lieutenant Hale's ship had been destroyed in the final moments of the operation, and a dozen others had sustained heavy damage. Yet the losses were not in vain. The raid had proved that humanity could still strike fear into the hearts of the Zorath, that they could disrupt even the most advanced of enemies with cunning and perseverance. Back in the underground command center, Commander Ilara Vaughn stood over a map of the solar system, tracing the lines of Earth's newly established fleet. It was small, barely a fraction of what Earth had once possessed, but it was growing. The victory had inspired more fighters to join the resistance, from both Earth's remaining colonies and unexpected allies from across the galaxy. Among them was Dr. Julian Hart, a brilliant scientist and former civilian engineer who had returned to the fold after his disappearance during the early stages of the war. Hart had been working on a top-secret project before the invasion, something he had barely shared with anyone. He had promised it could change the course of the war, but he'd been vague about the details. "We have to do something more than survive," Dr. Hart had told Vaughn when he arrived at the command center. "We need a way to match the Zorath's firepower, not just by numbers, but by technology. They're not invincible. Their ships rely on energy sources we've only just begun to understand." Hart's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity as he showed her the prototype, a new energy reactor capable of harnessing the energy of a nearby asteroid field. It was a radical design, capable of generating power on an unprecedented scale. If it worked, it could provide Earth's fleet with weapons that could rival even the Zorath's immense firepower. This, Hart said with a hint of pride, could level the playing field. The concept was revolutionary, but it also came with risks. The new energy source was untested, unstable, and dangerous. Vaughn knew that Earth had no choice but to take the gamble. The longer they waited, the more the Zorath would adapt. Humanity had already lost too much ground. "Let's make it happen," Vaughn said firmly. "We need every advantage we can get." Dr. Hart and his team of engineers went to work, hastily assembling the first prototype of the new energy reactor aboard the Phoenix, a warship that had once been a symbol of Earth's naval prowess before the war. Now it was little more than a husk of its former self, patched together with the limited resources available. As the new energy reactor powered up for the first time, a tense silence fell over the command center. The system hummed with power, lighting up the ship's instruments with an unfamiliar glow. The reactor was working, just as Hart had promised. But even as hope surged, Vaughn couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope. This new technology could change everything, but at what cost? The reactor could explode. It could fail. They would need to test it in combat soon. And the risks were higher than ever. As the first test fires of the new weapon were conducted, Vaughn stood at the observation window, staring out at the distant stars. The war was far from over, and every victory brought them closer to something greater, and far more dangerous. Yet despite the risks, she felt something stirring within her. The spirit of humanity was returning, and with it, their will to win. Humanity's first taste of true power since the Zorith invasion came during the Phoenix's trial run of the new reactor. The weapon, a brilliant surge of energy harnessed from an asteroid field near the edge of the solar system, was a game-changer. The energy blasts fired from the Phoenix's guns were enough to punch through the Zorith warship's reinforced shields, something no human weapon had done before. The results were promising, but as Vaughn and her crew quickly learned, the victory was fleeting. The Zorith, ruthless and ever adaptive, retaliated with vicious force. Within days of the weapon's successful test, Zorith ships launched a coordinated counterattack that reached the outer colonies. Earth's new advantage had only lasted a few precious hours. The Zorith were not content to let humanity's innovation stand unchecked. They'd brought in new bioengineered warships, monstrous, living ships grown from organic materials capable of self-repair. The first of these ships, the Stalkers, arrived on the edge of Earth's solar system. Their hulking, grotesque forms looked like a nightmare out of ancient legends, enormous biomachines bristling with jagged spines, their surfaces slick with the shimmer of living tissue. As they advanced toward Mars, the last bastion of humanity's defense, the Phoenix and its fleet faced their first real test of power. On the surface of Mars, the last human stronghold was already under siege. Earth's colonies on Mars had been fighting a losing battle with the Zorith forces. With their new bioengineered ships approaching, all hope seemed to hang by a thread. Commander Vaughn's resolve remained unshaken. She knew they couldn't afford to fall back. "All ships, prepare for battle," she ordered. "We stop them here, or humanity is lost." The Phoenix led the charge, its energy weapon crackling with power as it shot forward. The first volley of fire struck one of the Stalkers squarely, and for a moment, it seemed the human weapon would win the day. But the Stalker didn't falter. It twisted, its hull shifting in a horrifying display of organic regeneration. The ship healed itself, and moments later, the damaged sections began to regrow, forming new armor that was even more resilient than before. "We need to adjust our tactics, Commander," Lieutenant Hale called out as their ships circled the enemy, trying to stay out of the reach of the Stalkers' deadly plasma tendrils. "These ships can heal themselves. We can't just shoot and hope." Vaughn's mind raced as she watched the bioship's relentless advance. The Zorith weren't just fighters. They were predators. And these new warships were proof of that. Humanity had to adapt quickly or face total annihilation. "Target the core," Vaughn said decisively. "Find the weak points. The bioships can heal, but they're not invincible." As the Phoenix's crew zeroed in on the heart of the Stalker, another unexpected problem arose. Zorith reinforcements arrived, flooding the battlefield with a horde of smaller, nimble fighters, biodromes that darted in and out of fire, harassing the human fleet from all sides. The battle grew increasingly desperate. As the bioships closed in on Mars' surface, it was clear that Earth's forces were losing their edge. Vaughn's ships fought valiantly, but the overwhelming numbers of the Zorith began to crush their defenses. The human fleet had been stretched to its limits, and the hope brought by the new energy weapon seemed to flicker like a dying star. Then, as the battle raged on, a grim realization settled over Vaughn's shoulders. If the Zorith took Mars, there would be nowhere left for humanity to stand. Her gaze hardened. "This isn't over. Not yet." She activated a coded signal to Earth's remaining fleet. Desperate reinforcements from the colonies would have to be mobilized, or humanity would have no choice but to retreat into the void, leaving everything they had fought for behind. But the clock was ticking. Each second counted. The Zoreth were relentless. The stakes could not have been higher. As the war against the Zoreth raged on, Commander Vaughn found herself facing a moral dilemma that would define humanity's path forward. The brutal assault on Mars had been devastating, but it was not the end. The Zoreth's bioengineered warships, though terrifying, were not invincible. Humanity's ingenuity had proven capable of holding its own, when given time and the right strategy. But with the stakes higher than ever, the pressure to act quickly grew unbearable. As Earth's forces fought desperately to maintain control of Mars, General Braxton, a once esteemed officer, began to push for a more aggressive approach. His faction had gained influence in the wake of the Zoreth's initial successes, and his philosophy was clear: win at any cost. Braxton advocated for the use of biological weapons, disease bombs, engineered plagues, and devastating toxins that could turn the tide of the war. His arguments were compelling. They could end the conflict in weeks, perhaps even days. But the cost, both to their own people and the galaxy, would be staggering. Vaughn had always been a strategist, one who believed in using every asset at her disposal, but she had never been willing to cross the line into savagery. The moral price of such tactics was too high. She was torn between Braxton's cold pragmatism and her own belief in humanity's inherent sense of decency. The tension between the two factions reached a boiling point as Braxton addressed a council of commanders, including Vaughn, at the Central Command Hub on Mars. "We can't afford to hesitate," Braxton argued, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The Zoreth will burn us to the ground if we don't use every tool at our disposal. We've seen the horrors they've unleashed on our people. It's time we repay them in kind." Vaughn stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed, her face a mask of stoic resolve. The temptation to unleash weapons that could obliterate the Zoreth's forces was strong. But at what cost? How far would they be willing to go to win? "I understand your anger, General," Vaughn spoke, her voice calm but unwavering. "But this war is about more than survival. It's about our humanity. If we give up the moral high ground, we risk losing what we're fighting for." Braxton's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. "You're idealistic, Commander. We don't have the luxury of idealism anymore. The Zoreth are wiping out entire colonies. They'll stop at nothing to destroy us. But that doesn't mean we should become like them," Vaughn fired back. "We can win this war without sacrificing our soul." The debate raged for hours, with no resolution. Ultimately, it became clear that neither side would back down. As Vaughn left the council chamber, her mind raced. She knew that a decision was coming, one that would shape the future of Earth and its place in the galaxy. It was a decision she could not make alone. Late that night, as she stood on the observation deck overlooking Mars' barren surface, she reached out to the Larian Coalition, a group of alien species who had once been slaves under the Zoreth's rule. They had pledged their support to Earth, but the time for talks and diplomacy was running out. Vaughn needed them now more than ever. "We'll fight with you," came the voice of Elfar, the leader of the coalition, "but only if your people remain true to their values. If you lose your soul, we will not follow." Vaughn nodded solemnly. The weight of her responsibility had never been heavier. She could no longer delay the inevitable. It was time to make the call. If humanity were to survive this war and have a future among the stars, they would have to fight not just with blood and steel, but with their integrity intact. As the first of the Zoreth's superweapon, the Void Lance, was confirmed to be operational, Vaughn realized with cold clarity that the moment of reckoning had come. The enemy was preparing their ultimate weapon, one that could wipe out entire fleets in a single shot. Humanity's only hope now was to strike first, before the Zoreth could unleash its full power. The final call had been made. The Void Lance, the Zoreth's most devastating weapon, was now operational, and humanity's time to strike was quickly running out. Commander Vaughn knew that the only way to stop the Zoreth from wiping out Mars, and any remaining hope for Earth, was to take the fight to the heart of the enemy. The stakes had never been higher. Earth had been battered, and their remaining fleet was far from full strength. If they were to survive, they would need to hit the Zoreth where it would hurt the most. "We have one shot at this," Vaughn said, standing in front of her makeshift command center. Her voice was steel, her eyes hard with determination. "If we fail, the Zoreth will turn the tide in their favor, and Earth will fall." The room was silent as her officers and crew absorbed the gravity of her words. The Zoreth had developed the Void Lance in secret, a weapon capable of obliterating entire fleets from a distance, wiping out their most fortified bases with a single shot. The weapon could be deployed from their flagship, the Dark Star, which was now stationed in the outer reaches of the solar system, ready to strike. Vaughn's strategy was clear. They would need to launch a full-scale offensive against the Dark Star, disrupt its energy core, and destroy the Void Lance before it could fire again. But the Zoreth flagship was heavily defended, bristling with bioships, drones, and automated defenses. This would be no easy task. As her officers moved to prepare their ships, Vaughn turned to Dr. Julian Hart. The prototype energy reactor that had been developed to turn the tide of the war had proved to be their most potent weapon. However, Hart had warned her that the reactor still had critical flaws. Flaws that, if triggered at the wrong moment, could cause a catastrophic chain reaction. "You're certain we can get this thing to work in time?" Vaughn asked, her voice taut with concern. Hart, standing before the control panel, gave her a grim look. "I can't promise it won't fail, but without it, we have no hope of even getting close to the Dark Star. It's our only chance." Vaughn didn't hesitate. If this was the key to turning the tide, they would have to trust in its power, flaws and all. "Then we're moving forward," she said firmly. "Prepare for launch. All ships, go to battle stations." With the fleet in position, Vaughn led the charge, her flagship Vigilance leading the way. The mission was now in motion. The fleet split into two formations, one to draw the Zoreth's attention and provide a distraction, the other, smaller, faster ships, to slip past and strike at the Dark Star itself. The battle began with a furious roar, ships firing in all directions as the fleet clashed with the Zoreth's formidable forces. Vaughn's ships fought with desperation, their weapons crackling as they sought to break through the Zoreth's defenses. The Zoreth responded with a terrifying precision, unleashing waves of biodromes that swarmed around Earth's ships like angry wasps. Through the chaos, the Phoenix and Vigilance broke away, heading directly for the flagship. They had one shot to disrupt the Void Lance. A single, well-placed strike was all they could afford before the weapon powered up again. "Target the reactor core," Vaughn shouted as the Phoenix fired its newly developed energy weapon. The blast rocked the Dark Star, but its bioships quickly compensated, repairing the damage at a frightening speed. The Void Lance was charging, and time was running out. It was then that Dr. Hart's reactor kicked into gear. With a powerful burst of energy, the reactor unleashed a devastating pulse that hit the Dark Star's shield at precisely the right moment. The Zoreth flagship's systems stuttered, its defenses faltering under the unexpected overload. "Now or never. Take it down," Vaughn commanded, watching as the Phoenix fired one last, final blast of concentrated energy. The explosion sent shockwaves through space, and the Dark Star staggered. Then, with an earth-shattering roar, the flagship erupted in a spectacular chain of explosions. The Void Lance fell silent. For a moment, the battlefield was still. The Zoreth forces, disoriented by the loss of their flagship, hesitated. It was all the opening humanity needed. In the confusion, Earth's remaining fleet began to rally, striking with renewed force as their foes scrambled to recover. But the cost had been high. The Phoenix was crippled, and many ships had been lost in the chaotic battle. Commander Vaughn watched the aftermath from the command bridge of the Vigilance, breathing heavily but unwavering in her resolve. They had done it. They had struck the heart of the Zoreth Empire. For the first time since the invasion, there was a tangible sense of hope. Humanity had won a crucial victory, but the war was far from over. The Zoreth would regroup, and they would come again. But for now, the stars were theirs, and they would never surrender. The victory at the Dark Star was nothing short of monumental, but Commander Vaughn knew better than to celebrate. The Zoreth were not a force that could be wiped out with a single blow. Despite the destruction of their flagship, their empire was vast, their reach long, and their resources nearly endless. This victory, while vital, had only bought Earth a fleeting moment of respite. As Vaughn stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, she watched the aftermath unfold. The Zoreth had fallen back, temporarily disoriented by the loss of their most formidable weapon. But their retreat wouldn't last long. She knew they would rebuild, adapt, and retaliate. And when they did, humanity would have to be ready. "Commander," Lieutenant Hale's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "We've intercepted communications from Zoreth Command. They're regrouping and rallying forces from their deep space territories. We've only got a few weeks before they launch a full-scale counteroffensive." Vaughn's jaw tightened. The Zoreth weren't going to give up easily. But this time, humanity had something they didn't: hope. They had seen what was possible when they fought back with everything they had. "We'll use this time wisely," Vaughn replied, her voice resolute. "We'll rebuild our fleet, bolster our defenses, and take the fight to them. They've made the mistake of underestimating us before. Let's make sure they don't do it again." The next several days were a blur of activity as Vaughn and her officers worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable Zoreth counterattack. Mars became the focal point of Earth's efforts, with Earth's remaining fleet repaired, upgraded, and restructured. Dr. Hart's energy reactor prototype was integrated into several ships, boosting their firepower and giving them a fighting chance against the overwhelming odds. As the weeks passed, the tension in the command center grew. News came in of new Zoreth fleets assembling in the outer reaches of the solar system, preparing to converge on Mars. It was clear that the Zoreth were angry, their pride wounded by the loss of their flagship. They were coming for retribution, and they were bringing everything they had. "We need more time," Dr. Hart said one evening, as he reviewed schematics on a large screen. "If we can perfect the energy reactor, it'll give us the advantage we need. But we're pushing the limits of its capacity. I need more data to ensure it won't malfunction again." Vaughn nodded, her mind racing. "We don't have the luxury of time. We'll have to make do with what we've got. The Zoreth are coming, and we need to be ready." The next few days saw an unparalleled rush to complete repairs and finalize the upgrades. Despite the limited resources and constant threats of Zoreth attacks, humanity's resilience shone through. Engineers worked around the clock, and every able-bodied soldier volunteered to assist in the rebuilding efforts. Vaughn took every opportunity to visit the troops and speak with the officers, her presence a steady reminder that leadership wasn't just about commanding fleets, it was about inspiring the people who fought alongside her. But even as the preparations neared completion, there was something haunting about the situation. The Zoreth were relentless, and their numbers were growing. The Vigilance and its allied ships would only be able to hold the line for so long. They couldn't keep retreating, hoping for another miracle. Earth needed a decisive blow, something that would shake the very foundation of the Zoreth Empire. One night, as Vaughn paced through the command center, a new communication came in. A message from the Lyrian Coalition, their alien allies who had fought alongside Earth since the early days of the war. "Elthar here, Commander," the voice crackled through the comms. "We've received word from our scouts. The Zoreth are building something massive, deeper in the outer system. If you want to end this war, you'll need to hit them there." "The core vault." "The core vault," Vaughn repeated, her mind turning. "What's that?" "We believe it's their primary energy source, a deep space installation designed to power their war machine. If it's destroyed, the Zoreth will be crippled. They'll lose the ability to regenerate their fleet." Vaughn's eyes widened. This could be the turning point they needed. "We'll launch an all-out assault," she said, making her decision immediately. "Get the fleet ready. This is our chance to end this war before they can regroup." As the ships readied for departure, Vaughn stood on the observation deck, looking out into the black void of space. The stars had been her guide through the war, a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. They would strike at the heart of the Zorath Empire. They would take the fight to them, break their power, and cripple their ability to wage war. It was a bold move, fraught with risk, but it was the only option left. This was it, the final assault. And for the first time in months, Vaughn allowed herself a moment of hope. If they could destroy the core vault, they could break the Zorath's grip on the galaxy. Humanity had shown they could survive the darkest of times. Now they would show the Zorath that they could win. The fleet, now fully assembled and ready for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever undertaken, gathered in orbit around Mars. Commander Vaughn stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, staring out at the vast black expanse of space, her mind sharp with purpose. She had fought tooth and nail to get to this point, and now the end was in sight. Behind her, her officers worked in silence, preparing for the assault on the core vault. The plan was simple: breach the Zorath's deep space installation, destroy their primary energy source, and cripple their ability to regenerate their fleet. It would be a fight to the death, and the risk of failure was immense. But failure was no longer an option. Earth had no choice but to win. "Commander," Lieutenant Hale said, approaching with a somber look, "we've received a final communication from the Zorath. They're aware of our plans. They've mobilized everything they've got." Vaughn clenched her jaw. She knew this was coming. The Zorath, with their cunning intelligence, had no intention of letting their last great stronghold fall without a fight. It was a final test, a do-or-die battle that would determine the fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. "They won't give up without a fight," Vaughn said, her voice steady. "But neither will we. Prepare the fleet. We leave in 10 minutes. The fleet, a mixture of Earth's most advanced ships and their alien allies, began to move toward the outer rim of the solar system. Their destination was clear: the core vault, a massive structure deep within the asteroid belt, hidden away in a remote region of space. The Zorath had built it as the beating heart of their war machine, and now it would be their undoing. As the fleet neared the installation, the first signs of Zorath resistance appeared. Waves of biodrones surged out from hidden defense platforms, attacking the incoming ships in relentless swarms. The battle was chaotic from the moment it began, with flashes of light illuminating the void as weapons clashed, and the vacuum of space echoed with the cries of combat. Vaughn's flagship, the Vigilance, led the charge, its weapons firing in perfect synchrony with the fleet. The Zorath had anticipated the attack, but they had underestimated the resolve of humanity. The Vigilance's energy cannons cut through the biodrones with deadly precision, while the fleet's smaller ships weaved in and out of enemy fire, executing evasive maneuvers with deadly skill. "Hold the line," Vaughn barked over the comms. "We're not letting them get in our way. Keep pushing forward." The core vault loomed ahead, a gargantuan structure of alien design, pulsing with unnatural energy. As the fleet closed in, Zorath warships emerged from its shadow, massive and heavily fortified, eager to protect their last hope. They were faster, more brutal, and even more deadly than any force Earth had faced before. But the resolve of humanity was stronger. The first wave of Zorath ships collided with Earth's forces, but the human fleet held firm. The battle raged, with ships falling on both sides, but humanity's determination began to turn the tide. The Phoenix, still limping from its earlier damage, returned to the fray, its weapons recharged and ready to strike at the heart of the enemy. "We're almost there," Vaughn muttered under her breath as she watched the core vault grow closer on her screen. But just as hope seemed within reach, the Zorath unleashed their trump card. From within the heart of the core vault, a massive energy beam erupted, cutting through space like a deadly spear. It was the Void Lance, repaired and now even more powerful than before. The beam ripped through the Vigilance's shields, sending a shockwave through the ship that rattled every crew member to the core. Vaughn's hands gripped the console as the ship shuddered under the blast. She watched as the beam arced toward Earth's fleet, annihilating ships in its path. They had underestimated the Zorath's ability to recover, and now the stakes were higher than ever. "Get us into range," Vaughn shouted. "We need to disable the core, now." With renewed desperation, the Vigilance broke free from the chaos, flying directly toward the core vault. The fleet followed in tight formation, covering each other as best they could, but the Zorath's firepower was overwhelming. Ships were exploding left and right, and yet the Earth fleet pressed on. Their mission was clear. Vaughn knew they didn't have much time. The Void Lance would only recharge for so long, and if it fired again, it would be the end for all of them. Finally, the Vigilance came within range of the core vault's defenses. With a steady hand, Vaughn issued the command. "Target the core. All weapons, fire." The combined energy from Earth's fleet, focused and powered by Dr. Hart's reactor technology, was unleashed in a single catastrophic blast. The explosion ripped through the core vault's outer defenses, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, with a deafening roar, the core vault exploded. A blinding light consumed the battlefield as the Zorath's heart, its power, its regeneration, its weaponry, was torn apart in an instant. The Void Lance went silent, its deadly hum extinguished for good. For the first time in years, the stars were silent. The battle was over.